Sometimes I genuinely hate being a Sacramento Kings fan. This team just has zero identity, and I have no idea if they're trying to compete or they're trying to bottom out next season. It seems like they're just going to be mid once again. Their downfall over the past 3 seasons has just been a masterclass in horrible team management. This team went 48-34, good enough for the third seed in the Western Conference in 2023, and at the time, they set the record for the highest offensive rating in NBA history, and for the first time in about 2 decades, the vibes were actually extremely high in Sacramento. 2023 was probably the first time in my entire life that I've seen the Sacramento Kings get national media coverage, but it was extremely well deserved. That 2023 Kings team had one of the best offenses I've ever seen. I mean, here's some crazy stats from that season. They were first in the NBA in points per game, third in assists per game, fifth in three-pointers made per game, and they had the best shooting percentage in the entire NBA. This breakout season, which got them the third seed in the Western Conference, also ended their 16-year playoff drought, the longest in NBA history. Unfortunately for Kings fans, the team would go on to lose in the first round of the playoffs, taking the Golden State Warriors to 7 games. But even after losing the series, there was still a ton of excitement for the Sacramento Kings going into the 2024 season. It took a De'Aaron Fox broken finger, a Harrison Barnes missed game winner, and a Steph Curry 50 ball in Game 7 just to beat the Kings, so the future still looked extremely bright. If you made it this far in the video, it probably means that you like NBA content, so I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. I'm on the road to 500 subscribers, and I'm really trying to grow this channel and build a community of people that love basketball. Thanks. In my opinion, their priority that offseason should have been to bring in wing defenders and improve their front court depth, but in total Kings fashion, what do they end up doing? They bring in JaVale McGee, Chris Duarte, and Sasha Vezenkov from the EuroLeague, and none of these guys ended up actually cracking the rotation, with JaVale McGee only playing 7 minutes a night, Chris Duarte only playing 12 minutes a night, and the guy with the most hype out of all of them, Sasha Vezenkov, also only playing 12 minutes a night. Sasha was coming off an MVP season in the EuroLeague, and this guy was an absolute bucket. He once had a game where he scored 45 points, only dribbling 3 times. There was actually a decent amount of hype when it was announced that Sasha Vezenkov was going to be joining the Kings after being drafted in 2017, but it just never really panned out. I personally feel like Sasha was never given a real chance to prove himself in the NBA. I feel like every time he did get a few minutes, he played pretty well. Being the type of player that didn't need a dribble to be effective, he played extremely well coming off dribble handoffs with Domantas Sabonis, and I'll never forget the game that the Kings were down 24 points to the Warriors and still came back and won. As soon as Sasha entered the game, the energy completely shifted, and he was a plus 17 in only 15 minutes of play. My point is, I was just not a big fan of how Mike Brown handled Sasha Vezenkov. I just don't think he was given a real chance, and the Kings kind of fumbled a little bit. Regardless, the Kings essentially decided to stay put and run it back with the same core roster that they did in 2023. And I don't even think you have to know that much about the NBA to understand why that was just a terrible idea. While yes, the team was winning games and lighting the beam quite often, it didn't take much of a genius to understand that this team was not a true contender. Even though they had the best offense in the entire NBA, their defense was a whole nother story, as they ranked 24th in the league. The team was severely lacking in both point of attack defenders and size in general. They actually did run a pretty big starting lineup with De'Aaron Fox, and then surrounded him with 3 wings in Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, and Keegan Murray, all who were above 6'7", and then Domantas Sabonis at the center position, who was 6'10". The weakest link in the starting lineup from a defensive standpoint was Kevin Huerter, who constantly got picked on by opposing offenses. Harrison Barnes is someone that I would classify as a decent defender. He could hold his own, but he wasn't anything special. And as much as I love Domantas Sabonis, he's just not the greatest defender in the world. Even though he's 6'10 and extremely strong, he doesn't have the widest frame, and he frequently gets bodied by bigger centers. He's also just not the most athletic guy in the world, and he's not great at sliding his feet, so he'd get targeted in the pick and roll quite often. Then there's De'Aaron Fox, who I actually think is one of the most underrated defenders in the league. He's extremely athletic, he has great hands, he's always top of the league in steals. But standing at 6'3 and only 185 pounds, he can get bodied and picked on defense occasionally, but it's not a huge issue because he provides so much on offense. And lastly, there's Keegan Murray, who I think is the best defender on the Sacramento Kings. He guards the other team's best player basically every single night. He's 6'8 with a big wingspan, and he's extremely athletic, but most importantly, he has great defensive instincts, constantly getting in passing lanes and getting help side blocks. And to be completely honest, over the past few seasons, sometimes he looks like the only starter who cares about playing defense at all. Overall, even though the Kings starting lineup had decent size, they just simply lacked the athleticism required to guard teams in the NBA today. When you look at the bench rotation, it doesn't get much better. Their 6-man Malik Monk is an elite scorer, but he's just really undersized, and he's not a good defender. They also had Trey Lyles, who had decent size, but he's just really not that athletic for a power forward. I actually love what he provides on offense, especially his willingness to shoot the 3-ball, but he's just not a plus defender. They also had Alex Len playing backup center minutes, and although he has great size, he's just extremely slow, and he couldn't move his feet to save his life. The only positive defender on the bench from that 2023 season was Davion Mitchell, who at 6'2", 205 pounds is built more like a running back than an NBA player, and he's probably one of the best perimeter defenders I've ever seen. So to quickly recap, The 2023 Sacramento Kings Beam team that was the third seed in the Western Conference before losing to the Golden State Warriors only had 3 players in the entire rotation that I would classify as good NBA defenders in Keegan Murray, De'Aaron Fox, and Davion Mitchell, with 2 of them being undersized guards. But in the most Sacramento Kings fashion possible, upper management and ownership looked at the roster and its lack of defense and said, yep, let's run it back. We just got the 3rd seed. We're good enough. Let's run it back. So what happened in the 2024 NBA season? The Kings went 46-36, only losing 2 more games than the year prior. But instead of being the 3rd seed in the Western Conference, they ended up being the 9th seed. The Kings would go on to beat the Golden State Warriors in the first round of the play-in before falling to the New Orleans Pelicans in the second round of the play-in, meaning that they missed the playoffs entirely. The team hadn't necessarily gotten worse, but they stayed stagnant, which is a death sentence in today's NBA. In my opinion, the only bright spot for the Kings in the 2024 season was the emergence of Keon Ellis, who provided the team with another good perimeter defender, but surprise, surprise, he was also undersized. Regardless, it looked like the Kings had found a hidden gem. Going into the 2024 NBA offseason, Kings upper management and ownership refused to make the same mistake. They were not just going to run it back, they were going to make a move. And that's exactly what they did when it was announced that they were trading Harrison Barnes and Chris Duarte for DeMar DeRozan. When this news first came out, Sacramento Kings fans, including myself, were extremely excited. Sacramento isn't exactly a free agency destination, so it's pretty rare and exciting when an all-star caliber player joins the team. I wasn't too sure how I felt about the fit with DeMar DeRozan on the Kings, but I was just excited that the Kings were actually making a move. The other notable move that the Kings made in the 2024 offseason was when they traded Davion Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov for Jalen McDaniels. And I can tell you that when I saw this news, I was actually extremely excited. I had lost all hope that the Kings would ever actually bring in a wing defender, but then they finally did it. And then they traded him before the season started, so he never actually played a game for the Kings. Classic Kings move. Anyways, even after the disappointment that the 2024 season was, Kings fans still were excited going into the 2025 season, as they still had decent expectations, and Vegas had their win total placed at 46.5 wins. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, it only got worse for the Sacramento Kings. After starting the season 13-16, including a 6-12 record at home, and in the midst of a 5-game losing streak, it was announced that they were firing their head coach Mike Brown, who was the unanimous coach of the year in 2023. Now, while I do think Mike Brown was definitely a little bit of a scapegoat, I wasn't a huge fan of especially of how he was coaching at the beginning of last season. My main issue with him was that he simply refused to play Keon Ellis the minutes that he deserved. He'd often play him less than 20 minutes a night, sometimes he wouldn't play him at all, even though he definitely should have been a starter. He kept starting Kevin Huerter over him, which made absolutely no sense. Replacing Harrison Barnes with DeMar DeRozan meant that the starting lineup's defense was worse than it already was, and if you swap out Kevin Huerter for Keon Ellis, the defense would have improved significantly. But other than not playing Keon, I really don't think a lot of the losing was Mike Brown's fault. This roster just wasn't built to win NBA games. Their defense was still terrible because they still didn't have point of attack defenders and they still didn't have great size. The same 2 issues that plagued them in both 2023 and 2024. What made this even worse was that their offensive rating was declining for the 2nd straight season. The biggest reason for this was that DeMar DeRozan just simply doesn't fit with this team. While I do think DeMar DeRozan is a great player and he hits some of the toughest shots I've ever seen in my life, he just doesn't work with the Sacramento Kings. In 2023, the Kings had the 5th most 3-pointers made in the entire NBA. In 2024, they had the 4th most 3-pointers made in the entire NBA. But last season, it fell off a cliff, as they had the 24th most made 3-pointers in the entire NBA. When you bring in a guy like DeMar DeRozan, who's a low-volume 3-point shooter and needs the ball in his hands in order to be effective, your 3-pointers made as a team are obviously going to go down, but I think that he was actively hurting the offense. The reason that I think this is that DeMar DeRozan just plays way too slow for what the Kings are trying to do. The Kings are at their best when they're playing fast, shooting a ton of threes, relying on backdoor cuts, off-ball movement, and dribble handoffs, mostly funneled through Domantas Sabonis. The Kings were never an ISO-heavy team. De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk would get theirs occasionally, but that's just not what they prided themselves on, and that's just not what they were good at. But I cannot begin to tell you how many times last season DeMar DeRozan would ISO for 20 seconds, dribble the air out of the ball, pump fake 5 million times, and he's probably going to make the midi. But the offense was so stagnant, and literally nobody else was getting involved. De'Aaron Fox was sitting in the corner half the time, just waiting to shoot a catch-and-shoot 3. It's like he didn't even want to be there. And that brings me right to my next point, the De'Aaron Fox trade. One of the worst days in Kings history. After voicing his frustrations with the direction of the Kings, he didn't officially ask out, but the Kings ended up trading him, and the main player they got back was Zach LaVine. They also moved off Kevin Huerter. Sorry, Kevin, I was never really a fan. At least in my opinion, the Kings got absolutely fleeced on this deal. I think De'Aaron Fox is worth way more than that, but he did have the leverage, so it's just an unfortunate situation. I actually am a fan of Zach LaVine's game. I feel like he's extremely underrated in the NBA community. Most people just don't seem to understand how good of a scorer he is or how efficient he is. But again, he just does not work with the Sacramento Kings team, same as DeMar DeRozan. After this trade went down, the most common starting lineup that the Kings were running was Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, and Domantas Sabonis. This is honestly one of the most diabolical starting lineups I've ever seen in my entire life. It's just a ton of random guys thrown together that are elite scorers. I mean, Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan can all get the ball in the hoop. They have one good defender in the entire lineup with Keegan Murray, and then Domantas Sabonis is just there. He's a good player. He's above average. He's an all-star. I think he's underrated. But this starting lineup does not work together as a basketball roster. I mean, 4 of the 5 dudes in the starting lineup need the ball in their hands in order to be effective, so they just don't work together. Malik Monk was playing point guard out there. I think he actually showed off his passing ability. He's a decent playmaker, but he's best used as a shooting guard where he can come out there and get buckets. It's the same story with Zach LaVine. He just plays his best basketball when he's not on the court with DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan is just way too ISO heavy. He does not pass. So both Malik Monk and Zach LaVine are getting extremely underutilized for their talents and their scoring ability by being in the same lineup with DeMar DeRozan. And then the most tragic of all, in my opinion, is Domantas Sabonis, who works best when he's the offensive hub. He brings the ball up the court, or he gets the ball and he runs dribble handoffs at the top of the key. He runs pick and roll. He's an offensive hub. He's like a budget Jokic. But in this lineup, he's not even touching the rock. He's the 4th option. Nobody's looking his way to give him the ball. This is all without even mentioning that all 4 of these dudes are below average defenders. So they're not playing well off each other on offense because none of them have a role and they all can't have the ball at once. Only one person gets the basketball and none of them are good at defense. So yeah, this lineup is not good. And then there's poor Keegan Murray out there who's a lottery pick who's supposed to be developing his offensive game, who doesn't even get to touch the ball anymore except for random catch and shoot threes, and his role is super inconsistent. And then he's playing his heart out on defense, watching these other guys playing horrible defense around him. I just feel bad for Keegan, man. At the trade deadline, the Kings did make 2 solid additions that I do have to give them some credit for when they brought in Jake LaRavia and Jonas Valanciunas. Again, they finally brought in a wing defender that could hit threes, and they finally got a good backup big man to back up Domantas Sabonis. But per usual, Jake LaRavia played extremely well every time he got in the game, I thought, in my opinion. I mean, they just have no wing depth. They have no 3-and-D players on the team, essentially, other than Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray. And Jake LaRavia played well every single time he got on the floor, but they just refused to give him major minutes. But what do I know? Maybe I'm wrong. And then I also think that Jonas Valanciunas played great when he was on the floor, but again, he's just another offensive guy. His defense is pretty bad. He's really slow. He's huge, but he's just way too slow to play any sort of good or helpful defense on a team that desperately needs defense. Just overall, the 2025 Kings roster that ended the season has a ton of guys that are legit NBA players. They just are way too offensively focused for how bad they are at offense. And they just don't have enough defenders on the team to be good at defense, so overall the team's just not good. This Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan iteration of the Kings finished the season 40-42. Once again, they were the 9th seed in the Western Conference, but this time they lost 1 game earlier, losing in the first round at home to the Dallas Mavericks. Without Luka Doncic, the Anthony Davis-led Dallas Mavericks, and guess what? Kyrie Irving was not playing. So at this point you might be wondering, how on earth could it possibly get worse for the Sacramento Kings? Let me introduce you to the 2025 Sacramento Kings NBA offseason. The main move that the Kings made this offseason was bringing in veteran point guard Dennis Schroeder. I actually really like Dennis Schroeder as a player. I think he's a great point guard. I think he's best suited as a backup point guard, but I think he's going to be the starter for the Sacramento Kings based off how much money they gave him. And I guess he helps this team because now they have a true playmaker at point guard. He's a solid defender, but again, he's also undersized, which I guess the Kings love getting undersized guards that are good at defense. But overall, I just have no idea what the Kings management is thinking, giving a guy like Dennis Schroeder that much money and the keys to the starting point guard spot in Sacramento. This team just needs to blow it up. Dennis Schroeder does not move the needle. The Western Conference is way too stacked, and he does nothing to make the Kings better. They might win like 2 more games because Dennis Schroeder is the starting point guard. They also traded away Jonas Valanciunas and brought in Dario Saric, who I don't think is ever going to touch the court for the Sacramento Kings. And then they brought in Drew Eubanks to have another backup center behind Domantas Sabonis. I think Drew Eubanks is solid. Again, he does nothing to move the needle for this team. They are not a contender. Honestly, the most exciting part about this offseason for the Sacramento Kings was the 2 rookies they drafted in Neat Clifford and Maxime Reynaud. I think that both these guys were honestly a steal at where they were drafted. My biggest concern with both these guys is that they aren't going to get any real NBA minutes because it seems like the Kings are going to pretend to be a playoff team again next season, even though they're just simply not good enough. But the funniest part about this offseason has definitely been all the Russell Westbrook rumors. I mean, if they bring in Russell Westbrook, this team is just an absolute joke. I actually love Russell Westbrook's game. I think he played great for Denver last season, but what on earth is he going to do to help the Sacramento Kings? This team is just not good enough to compete, and Russell Westbrook does nothing for them. Oh yeah, and he can't shoot, and this team needs more three-point shooting. And he's a good defender, but we have two guards. We have Keon Ellis, we have Devin Carter. They need to get minutes, they need to develop. Please do not bring in Russell Westbrook. That would be idiotic. Overall, the Sacramento Kings are going to be mid once again, just like they are pretty much every year. Actually, they usually suck, but then they were good for one season. Now they're going to be mid again. They have talented guys on the roster, but this is one of the worst constructed rosters I've ever seen in my entire life of any NBA team. These guys just do not fit together. If I'm the Sacramento Kings, the first thing I'm doing is trying to trade DeMar DeRozan, and then I'm going to look for a trade for Zach LaVine. I might even consider trading Sabonis, as much as that hurts. But these young guys need a chance to get real NBA minutes so that they can develop. Keegan Murray is getting squandered in this offense and on this team as a whole. He's a great piece. Keon Ellis needs to get minutes. Devin Carter needs to get minutes. Maxime Reynaud needs to get minutes. And Nick Clifford especially needs to get minutes. I think that he's going to be great for this team. The Sacramento Kings essentially just need to blow it up and start over. I know that hurts because they had a playoff drought for 16 seasons, but as a Kings fan, trying to run this back and trying to be the 9th seed again, why are they trying to roleplay being the Chicago Bulls? Nobody wants to be the Bulls. They're terrible. But that's just my take. You guys can let me know what you think about the Sacramento Kings down in the comments. And if you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate a subscribe and a like. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.